Due to the rise of more and more hand traps over the years, not to mention the never-ending cycle of power creep, trap cards in today's game have steadily dwindled. The reason why is simple. Inherent design flaws make them worse than other card types. They often have stiff activation requirements and tend to be ineffective going second. In this video, I want to explore those reasons and also discuss potential alternatives to trap cards in the game today. My name is Avery, and this is the slow death of trap cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Be sure to smash the boo-boo stain off that like and subscribe button as we climb even higher the 1700 ladder. One of the reasons traditional trap cards are no longer viable is that they have stiff activation requirements. By this I mean that their activation requirements aren't exactly chainable. They have to be activated in response to a summon or an attack, generally. Cards such as Bottomless Trap Hole and Torrential Tribute have to be activated in response to a summon. Mirror Force has to be activated in response to an attack. This often means that by the time they're able to be activated, they're either off the board or will be ineffective against your opponent's field. These kinds of trap cards are also easier for the opponent to remove before they're activated. With all the back row hate that's in the game nowadays, as well as cards that either have destruction protection or some kind of negate, it's hard to meet the activation requirements of these kind of trap cards. When Yugioh was a force in the meta way back in the day, a pseudo flip effect was at its core. Its main weakness was in going second, where it took an extra turn to go off. This was referred to by some as going third, and the same problem is faced by traditional trap cards as well. Reactive traps take away from possible outs to establish boards. If you're going second, cards such as Mirror Force or Torrential Tribute are basically dead in hand. But even going first, where they are more effective, those traps fail to increase combo potential. And we all know that combo potential is very important in today's link-dominated metagame. Just look at any K9 Vanquish Soul or Yummy combo sheet, spreadsheet, or video for that matter. Traditional traps may even be considered win more at this point. This is debatable, but traditional trap cards simply don't help enough in the early game, which is the most important point of the game today, I would argue. As such, they're either too slow, too reactive, or they're superfluous and win more. Compulsory Evacuation Device is perhaps one of the most versatile traditional traps, oppressively or defensively. Compulsory is useful going first or second. It's disruptive, chainable, and perhaps most importantly, it doesn't send any cards to the graveyard. Compulse forces an opponent to lose a resource on the board without getting any graveyard effects from it. The fact that it is chainable is also an advantage. So long as there's a monster on the board, it can't be activated. It can target monsters on either side of the field, meaning you can protect your own monsters or disrupt an opponent's plays. There's a reason Bottomless Trap Hole and Torrential Tribute were unlimited, and Compulse was not many years ago. Another good example of this, and I would argue a power-crept version of this concept, is Destructive Daruma Karma Cannon. Now, Karma Cannon is essentially a Book of Eclipse, but with it being a trap card, goes great in decks that want to play a lot of traps. Say something like Labyrinth, or to a much lesser extent, Trap Trick. But Karma Cannon can also send monsters to the grave that aren't flipped face down by its effect. So it's a Book of Eclipse that can also potentially board wipe. I saw some players side decking Karma Cannon when Malice was first released, since Malice would have multiple link monsters on the field, and assuming they didn't have a negate, the Karma Cannon could just clear the board, or you could just use it to clear link monsters while they're trying to build a board. The clearest comparison to these traditional traps are their newer, more flexible version. Traps such as Evenly Matched are incredibly powerful, and now with the rise of hand traps, we have monster cards that are discarded for quicker utility effects, also completely wiping out the need for most old school trap cards. Why use Bottomless on a Stratos when you could Ash the Stratos and it gets no effect, whereas with Bottomless, they still get the search and the hero player would just keep comboing even if you kill the Stratos. Quick play spells share the defensive quality of traps while functioning as spells in terms of breaking boards. All of these are better options than traditional trap cards in many ways due to this. Now, in an attempt to make traps even more effective, Konami has been beefing up today's trap cards. I would argue that Breakthrough Skill was the first great example of power creeping traditional traps. Though reactive, it can be used both on the field and from the graveyard, giving it a lot of versatility. Other good trap cards from back in the day that come to mind is things like Lost Wind and, to a lesser degree, Fiendish Chain. I would also argue that Infinite Impermanence was the successor to Breakthrough Skill, because it's essentially a power creep version of Breakthrough to a skill if you think about it, especially since you can activate it from the hand and it negates a monster effect. But Konami has given us even quicker solutions. Evenly Matched essentially acts as an Evil Swarm Exciton Knight in your hand, and it is proven over the years to be able to keep huge boards in check, which technically is a function of a traditional trap. Evenly's been around for so long now, I would go as far to say it is the new age version of a traditional trap card, at least in the modern era. Hand traps are basically successors of traditional trap cards nowadays. They do much to mitigate the weaknesses of traditional traps. Hand traps can be activated at easier times, defend while going second, and are virtually impossible to read. On the whole, hand traps defend against oppressing plays when going second, and can also oppress the opponent when going first. I can't tell you how many times I've built a board playing a meta deck, and then I look at my hand of, say, 2 hand traps, and I look at my opponent's hand after, say, they played a hand trap, and I'm like, okay, cool. They're essentially playing with 2 less cards in their hand because I have 2 potential hand traps that could just completely blow them out of the game. Hand traps have become the go-to trap cards of today's metagame. However, they do have their own design issues. Hand traps are often, emphasis on often, limited in scope. Can you imagine if a hand trap was able to counter literally anything? Now, many would argue that that is what Ash Blossom is, since it can be used against so many cards, but that's neither here nor there. I feel like that's more format dependent, and I also feel like that kind of goes hand in hand with things like Droll and Lockbird, because yes, Droll and Lockbird can be a turn skip for, say, something like Mitsurugi if they don't have an out to the Droll and Lockbird, but I would argue that's more of a meta-dependent case. Instead, hand traps counter specific things, usually, so they're used to interrupt combos. Hand traps require you to understand when they will be most effective. Now, in this, they are reminiscent of traditional trap cards, as they require knowledge and timing to be effective. There are not many generically good quick play spells in Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of the obvious book spells, Call by the Grave, or Crossout Designator. Now, I believe this to be due to their inherent traits that make them superior in both spells and traps. Cards like Book of Moon are, of course, incredibly useful. Book, in particular, can help you stop combos, break boards, attack over threats, block attacks, and even stop effect negation. You can activate quick play spells either by setting them if it's your opponent's turn, or from your hand on your turn. This versatility makes quick play spells very powerful. Simply put, they take the best qualities of both hand traps and traditional traps and put them into a spell card. I don't see traps continuing the trends of the past. Lately, traps have lost a bit of their identity. They've become more of a powerful effect kind of card, something like Trickstar Reincarnation. In fact, most archetype traps are searchable, negating the surprise aspect of a trap. Quicker options will replace weaker reactive hand traps. Alternatively, they will become more powerful to make up for their strict activation requirements. At this point in the game, you have to play a deck dedicated to a trap strategy like Trap Tricks or Labyrinth, and I will give those decks credit. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with old school traps, especially in decks like Labyrinth that want to play a bunch of traps. For example, a while back, I saw a 60-card Labyrinth build playing Magical Hats of all things, where the game plan was to use Magical Hats to set the welcome Labyrinth traps so that they could get into the graveyard to use their engrave effects. There are also builds that I've seen that have used some of the Mirror Force retrains, like Drowning or Storming Mirror Force, because the argument can be made that in this day and age of Yu-Gi-Oh!, who's expecting a Mirror Force trap card? But please, what do you think about this, guys? Let me know down in the comments below. I'm really looking forward to see what the community has to say about this. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you again for all of the love and support on the videos. It's been crazy. We've been exploding like a power level. I really appreciate all the love and support, and I hope you know I truly do mean that. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video.